Hi there, Marvin Lindsay. You can tell my name is Marvin. This cup holder chat is also to bring you up to date on where I am with my 21-day racial equity habit building challenge. And where I am is I just listened to the second episode of this Seeing White podcast that was done in 2017. I'll put the link below in the comments where I post this. And this, I'm just going to offer just a quick summary of what I heard, invitation to listen to it, and some implications, I think, about issues of race and Christian theology. And this episode that I listened to was about where the idea of race, and especially whiteness, comes from. And the host interviews a variety of scholars and academics, and they point out that in the ancient world, ancient writers did note that there are physical differences in the appearance of people, that there are cultural differences in people based on where they live in the world, but there really wasn't a concept of race. That concept, he says, and he was surprised to find this, at least in the work of one scholar, can be traced to one person, that the idea of race was invented, not discovered, but invented by the biographer of the Portuguese king Henry the Navigator in the 15th century. And the biographer lumped all of the various tribes in sub-Saharan Africa together under the category of black. And he did that in the biography to justify Henry the Navigator's slave trade, the Portuguese slave trade, acquiring and exploiting sub-Saharan African people. Because Henry the Navigator was one of the first Europeans who didn't purchase slaves from North Africans through middlemen, but kind of went around those middlemen and acquired slaves in sub-Saharan Africa directly. The podcast talks about how this particular episode, how race both does and doesn't exist. On the one hand, there is more. One expert they quote points out that there is more genetic similarity between people of different races than there is in penguins of the same tribe. So all penguins look alike, and yet there's more diversity among penguins than there are with human beings who look very different. So on the one hand, race doesn't exist. On the other hand, race does exist, because you can use categories of white and black and predict how people are going to do in life. Not, with 100% reliability, but with a large amount of reliability. So race doesn't exist as a biological thing, but it is a political and cultural and social construct. The other thing that they talk about in this podcast is that we have it all backwards when it comes to racial discrimination. We begin with racial attitudes. So some people have prejudices against other people, and that leads them to do bad things to other people. And when people's attitudes and ignorance is adjusted, then they begin to treat other people well. And the podcast episode that I listened to says, no, it's actually just the other way around. People begin with a desire to exploit other people. And then racism becomes a kind of after-the-fact justification for that exploitation, which is exactly what happened with the exploitation of sub-Saharan Africans. The concept of blackness and the idea that Henry the Navigator's biographer puts out is that these poor, beastly sub-Saharan Africans would be better off enslaved by Christians than they would be free as non-Christians in Africa. That was the after-the-fact justification for exploiting these people, for going and grabbing them and cheating them out of their labor. And, I thought about this, and this really sounds very Christian to me. Jesus says in the Gospel of Mark, he says, the kings of the Gentiles like to lord it over their subjects, and their great ones are called tyrants over them, but it's not going to be like that with you. The greatest among you should be as a servant to all. And so Jesus, he sort of redefines greatness as service And he also identifies exploitation, domination as the really big problem in all human societies. And he calls on the church to be a kind of contrast society, a community that he's building that's built on sharing, it's built on love, it's built on mutual affection. It's not built on exploitation or domination. And there's a Christian theologian who picks up on this idea and just really runs with it. Augustine, who actually is mentioned in the podcast as someone who wrote eloquently about the universal equality of all people. He says that basically the big problem with human beings is it's in Latin, it's libido dominandi, the lust to dominate. That we all succumb to the sin of pride, and when we fall into pride, we want to be God instead of letting God be God, and then we want to lord it over other people instead of accepting our proper created role as subjects of God and as partners and sharers in God's goodness. So it's really interesting to me, but it's really challenging at the same time, because it seems like what the outcome of this is that it's not about changing people's attitudes. It's about changing power structures. That's a lot more difficult, isn't it? And, secular people are working on this and have worked on it for a long time. But we have a distinctive voice to bring to this as Christians, because we have seen in the cross of Jesus Christ that greatness is, and power and authority is sacrificial love, self-giving love, mutual affection. So that's what I'm left with today, is to scrutinize my own pride and lust to dominate, and to see that on display wherever it is, and recognize it for what it is, and repent of it in myself, and repent of glorifying it or supporting it in society. So that's this couple chat for this Friday, June 12th, and let me know in the comments what you're doing with the 21-day Racial Equity Habit Building Challenge. Take care, and God bless.